Hey everyone! In this video I wanna answer a question that has been asked in this channel several times. Which DRPGs or first-person dungeon crawlers do you recommend to get into the genre? Now this one took quite the time to put together because, as I have shown in many other videos, oftentimes this subgenre is misunderstood and it can feel like a slap in the face. I will leave some links in the description in case you are interested to check them out. But what is the main premise of this video? I wanna share kind of normal, easy entries, trying to avoid terribly complicated mapping or games that may require a lot of time to finish. So do not expect to see entries like Odyssey, Skyrim and things like that. And I'll try to cover both sides of the spectrum, Western and Japanese approaches. And in all honesty, if you have that gut feeling that this is not for you, don't force yourself. The RPGs are really old school and pretty much a subgenre that few like to jump into. In any case, for the ones interested, I'll keep posting more of these games in the future. So without further ado and no particular order, let's begin. Quite ironically, I want to open the curtain with an entry that is not a first-person dungeon crawler, but pretty much plays like one. Now, I took this choice because I know that for a lot of people, looking at the character is something important. Brandish, the Dark Revenant, is a good first step into DRPGs. These games have been around since 1991, but they have gone really low under the radar, and to be honest, I am not surprised. But let's go by steps. Here we take control of Ares, a swordman who fell inside of an old dungeon, where our objective is going to be escape, and the main antagonist Della will pursue Ares along the journey. Now, this game doesn't have the strongest of stories. I will say that it is kept to a bare minimum, as old school approaches. The gameplay, on the other hand, takes an interesting idea from first-person dungeon crawlers but adapts action elements, like in Eye of the Beholder, in a sense thinking this game as a DRPG played in third person, where you will face several puzzles because of how it is played. To me, the most entertaining part in this entry comes with bosses, as they are puzzle-oriented. You cannot really brute force your way, as your weapons get damaged and you need to change them kinda constantly. So strategy and management will play an important role here. Despite sounding a bit convoluted, it is a lot of fun, as the game has a nice pace, letting the player catch up with the mechanics to then throw interesting challenges left and right. Now this game is quite short, in somewhere around 20-25 hours you will be done with it. From here let's dive into real DRPGs with Vaporim, a steampunk dungeon crawler. As in Brandish, the story is there, but it is not the main dish of this entry. What is cool about this game is that it gives you several choices at the very beginning, where you can get different suits that specialize in particular things, depending from your playstyle. Here you will see that all of your actions have a cooldown, so you cannot spam attacks left and right, and it is going to have that kind of tank movement, so it is one step at a time, then again as the previous entry. Now, in Vaporim, if there is something that may feel slow, are the puzzles. This is not a game that you can brute force your way, as you will find plenty of rooms where you need to move boxes left and right, or crack your head to understand how to activate a lever or something along those lines. Of course, as you reach further areas, the challenges will get tougher. Since the get-go, I will say that you are going to see game over a number of times, so try to save quite constantly and after each challenging part. Because while opening some doors, plenty of enemies may catch up to you real fast. Even when this game may look sluggish, dexterity and tactics will play an important role here. And it is not a walk in the park, I will say normal difficulty. But if you have some issues with the controls and how to dance around the enemies, it may be quite challenging. Vaporim can be finished in somewhere around 20-25 hours. In the next entry I wanna share, Saviors of Sapphire Wings. Now this game has different releases, so you may find it as Students of Round, Entaku no Seito, Blue Wing Chevalier, or Saviors of Sapphire Wings. Just try to avoid the Steam version, I kinda remember that it had some issues, so just check that before you get it. The one I recommend the most is the version that comes along Stranger of Sword City. In this entry we are going to follow one of the most classic stories with light versus dark. The hero alone, two companions are ready to fight the Demon Lord, but things don't go as expected, as the Demon Lord set a trap, breaking an important weapon and beating our trio without issues. After this event, Alda was engulfed in darkness for around 100 years, until once again the hero comes back. I will say that this is a good story, definitely not for everyone, as you may find several silly moments depending from your answers. In all honesty, I liked it. It has a bit of both sides. Gameplay wise, you can create your main character however you like. If you ask me, I recommend you to focus on damage, so go for strength. Down the line you will get other companions, and they have some defined task. Just keep an eye on the soul type, as they help some specific classes. In general, this is a game where matching a particular stat helps you much more in comparison for something balanced. So offensive units go for strength and agility, defensive units for vitality, agility and luck, healers for mysticism, and so on. Later you will have the chance to add a subclass, so try to synergize classes. The very beginning of this game can be really slow, so give it some time. You will find some challenges down the line, but nothing to grind gears. However, I recommend to farm a tiny bit in each area, as sometimes you might find interesting things. Now, in comparison to older DRPGs, this is what I will say normal difficulty. Yes, most likely you are going to see some game overs, it is not a walk in the park, but it is not unfair, and you can save pretty much whenever you like. What can be a bit confusing is that you will need to backtrack some areas to gather key items, so it is important to keep notes about doors or areas you were not able to visit at first. And puzzles can be quite interesting, sometimes needing to step in particular places or things like that. Depending from your pace, in somewhere around 40 hours you will be done with this entry. But if you wanna dive more, there is a nice and challenging post-content waiting for you. In the next entry, I want to talk about Legends of Grimrock. Here we are going to follow some prisoners set inside of Grimrock. The challenge to be forgiven and set free is to reach the bottom of this place. Simple as that. There are interesting things, but I'll let you find them out as you progress. Legends of Grimrock is a love letter to the aforementioned Eye of the Beholder. Here you have the chance to use a pre-created party or choose your own. This is perhaps where things might get tricky, so there is no shame in checking some guides or experimenting and failing. However, I do recommend to set your own party. If you truly want to get into this subgenre, that is pretty much the main standard. It is not that hard, but it takes time to understand the races and skills. In comparison to previous entries, here I am setting the bar into kinda hardish territory. Then again, not as unforgiving as all DRPGs, but definitely harder for today's standards. But you can finish the game in somewhere around 20-25 hours. Similar as Vaporeon, here you will need some dexterity and be tactical with your steps, as you need to click on each character to attack, and using magic can be tricky, as you need to press particular orders. In any case, what's waiting ahead of you are several puzzles, where sometimes you need to press really specific places or activate levers to unlock areas. You don't need to unlock everything, but of course the game rewards those who take the time to understand some of those puzzles. Now, being creative is an important thing in this game, so once again, it is not something as push forward and that's it. And there are some other management elements, as food intake. My best recommendation is do not let your food bar go that low. Maybe the only negative, putting everything on paper, is that the ending feels a bit rushed, but I don't know, that isn't that big of a deal. Of course, if you wanna play some more, the community has different dungeons, so you can keep diving into it multiple times. Let's continue with Demon Gaze 2. The main reason why I recommend this entry is because you don't need to create characters, and oftentimes I see that people dislike the RPGs because they lack protagonists in the narrative. You might ask, do I have to play Demon Gaze 1 to get this entry? Not really. While there are some references and some characters are the same as in the first game, this entry will explain things as you go. Perhaps the last stretch of the game is where you are going to have some questions, because you will see some things that will make no real sense. Whatever the case, its story has an interesting cast of characters, and the companions that join you have a lot of personality, so it is an entertaining story. Not for everyone, but at the end of the day, I consider it good. Gameplay wise, as you advance you will capture demons, that will work as your companions. Each of these demons have pretty much two classes. For example, Pegasus is a paladin and a cleric, so you just have to focus on vitality, mysticism, luck and agility. But as you advance in the game, you will see the so-called circles, where you place gems to get specific loot, and progress through the story. If you consider some of your characters need newer skills to customize your formation, you can also get them in these circles. Just beware that these items are limited, and that each area has different skills as rewards. Most of the best ones can be found late in the game, so check a guide if you're looking for something in specific. While it is an easy first-person dungeon crawler, I recommend you to farm a bit. This game has slight challenges, so you cannot rush through the game. But what's cool is that if you're having a hard time, you can reduce the difficulty. An amazing thing about this game are the puzzles. At first they are meh, just press some buttons in some orders, but as you progress, they become harder and harder in an entertaining way. This entry takes somewhere around 40 hours to finish the main story, and the post-content is something variable, as it turns quite tough, but if you enjoy a meaty farming session, it's worth diving further. Labyrinth of Sangetsu can be a bit questionable, but I recommend it because it is the classic wizardry approach. Same classes, pretty much same skills, and it is going to be rough around the edges. For an adventure that takes 20 hours, it gets a pass check from my side. This entry shares a story where the ink started to invade the land, and whatever entered in contact was turned into a beast. And as humans were cornered, Aido became the last human stronghold, where they happily accepted adventurers to fight the ink back. While it's narratively simple, it's quite enjoyable. It is a decent story. In Labyrinth of Sangetsu you can create your characters. Things to consider is that each class has specific skills that will be usable if you have the right alignment. So your paladin has to be good, otherwise you won't be able to use its tanking skills, and well, don't use a paladin. The same principle applies to pretty much every class. So try to make a plan about how you're going to reclass your units according to their alignment. But do not get too attached to them, because death is something that most likely you are going to see here. The general difficulty of this game is high, so it is important to level up, get some skills and then reclass. That way your characters will have extra HP and your chances to stay alive increase. Otherwise, classes like mages may have a rough time, as they can pretty much be one-shot by bosses, so farming sessions are pretty much mandatory. I know this can be seen as something negative, but if you wanna get into DRPGs, that's pretty much the standard, and I believe it is manageable when the game isn't that long. Later, as you learn at least the turn-based system approach, you won't have to farm that much, as you will understand the limits of your team, unless the game is unfair just because. Whatever the case, what's cool about Labyrinth of Sangetsu is that it is simple and straightforward in nature. There is only a couple of parts that can be tricky, but nothing to break your head. For the 7th entry, Operation Babel. In order of events, this is the 3rd arc from the Edged games, but unless you want to suffer like a masochist, yep, you can play Operation Abyss, and then jump into this entry. If you ask me, do I have to play the previous games to understand this story? Yes and no. You will get 80% of what's going on here. And the thing is that there are some references like the cemetery. However, I would argue that you don't really need to play the previous games. In this entry we will see how entities from another dimension invade the Earth, and Alice Mifune, captain of the Eds, gets captured, so it is up to new members to save the day. Its story is simple in nature, until you uncover the true events of the past, and what happened to this city. After that point I will say that it starts to get better and better. Gameplay wise, it takes somewhere around 35 hours to finish this game, unless you want to dive into its post content, and beat every single boss. Otherwise, it is a quite long entry that can reach like 80 hours or even more. And as the previous game, you will have the chance to create your characters, with the difference that here, almost right away you can choose a subclass, and as you level up your class and subclass, you will be able to use more and more skills, so just keep in mind that you need to synergize your units. Samurais are the ones that, if well equipped, they can carry your team for a lot of time. In any case, at first it is a simple experience, until you reach like the 2nd or 3rd dungeon. Inside these places you will find some puzzles, some are really easy to get, others are quite complicated. So once again, read really well what is hinted. As for the general difficulty, I will say that it is normal, but there are some interesting challenges down the line. Most likely the Führer and Buccaneer will own your arse a couple of times, as well as some random variants that can appear in really bad places where you can't use magic attacks, so try to save constantly. Other thing to point out is that dungeons can be a bit too much for some people, as each labyrinth is quite big, oftentimes with several floors, but for the average time to finish the game, I don't consider it as something as stressful as other entries where you will dive into never-ending mazes. As honorable mentions, I have talked about Undernaut several times, so if you have been around this channel you know I have to name it. If you don't mind questionable entries, Muero Crystal Age is kinda easy, but late dungeons and post-content can be challenging. And Orcs and Elves. Down the line, there are some things that can be annoying, nonetheless it is still acceptable for a game to invite people into the genre. And in our last stop, Star Crawlers. Some weeks ago I talked about this game. Its story starts quite slow, but late chapters become quite interesting as you unravel the secrets behind the Stella Marine, and how its whole crew disappeared, and as many Western RPGs, your choices will shape future events. In this intro we have some initial choices, each unit having their own thing, so it can take a bit of time to synergize your whole crew. And I recommend you to take the time because depending from your characters, you may be able to disable traps, open some doors, and so on. Now, the reason why I recommend this game is because it has an interesting level design, where each stage, out of story ones, are randomly generated, refreshing this dungeon crawling experience, because if you have limited time to play, per stage I will say that you can take somewhere around 10-30 minutes. In the randomly generated stages, you will find in general 2 bosses that offer a nice challenge and amazing loot. It's worth mentioning that some of these random stages can be quite simple or a bit complex, depending from the objective. Star Crawlers offer multiple difficulties, so you can set it depending from your experience, and it takes somewhere around 40 hours to finish, let's say the main story. Nonetheless, if you wanna keep playing, every now and then new important quests will appear, and the grinding sessions are superb, as you can fine-tune your characters however you prefer, and even hire every single character if you desire. So those are the details I consider amazing as introductory games for DRPGs. If you have any question, I am always happy to help. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.